What happened at the Dilson farm? In my world, there are locations that some may consider strange. Of course, there are typically haunted houses and old burial grounds that may or may not be actually supernatural, but no one could truly comprehend the happenings at the Dilson farm. The Dilson farm was a place that even the bravest adventurers would not dare to go. It was hard to call skeptics truly skeptic when they refused to even set foot in that place. The village of the Dilson farm were not exactly known, but the history was enough to write a book. The first case would be from 1962. The Dillison farm would have been inherited by John and Mabel Dillison along with their 4 children. John had inherited the farm from his grandfather, who sadly passed away from tuberculosis. John's father, Henry, would have been described by fellow people as a good man. He was a hard worker who cared about his farm as much as he cared about family. For many decades, Henry lived on the farm, tending as if he had never, though it was never known if he had owned the farm or if he had just inherited it himself. In his final days, he was almost hysterical. As a hospital room, he would scream constantly about the holes in the field and the hands rising from the ground. No one ever knew what he meant before he died. It wasn't until John inherited the farm. Neighbors were not as keen to see Diligence as they were to Henry. John was described as a raging drunk, and Mabel was a loud, burdensome woman. The 3 Dillison's sons were just as troublesome teens who skipped school and threw parties on the farm, and the one's Dillison daughter was a sheltered and spoiled child. Almost daily, police would be called to the farm. From domestic abuse to noise complaints, there's nothing that the Dillisons weren't notorious for. That wasn't until the night of May 16th, 1863. Around midnight, the neighbors heard Mabel Dillison screaming and shouting from the fields. She was naked and red in the face. She seemed screaming and hysterical about something. The situation had turned grim when she discovered why she was behaving this way. A few days, Mabel's beloved cat Whiskey had gone missing. Mabel speculated that perhaps John had something to do with it. It wasn't until that night that Mabel was taking a late shower and heard faint meows from the bathroom window. She didn't even put any clothes before she just decided to run outside. That was when she met the grisly sight. Mabel discovered Whiskey. He had been completely skinned, but it was like his fur hadn't been shaved. Whiskey's skin was completely gone. It was like it had been cleanly peeled. The worst part about this poor thing was still alive. After seeing this, Mabel went in an absolute meltdown. She began screaming naked into the night, blaming John. Mabel spent the night in police custody for her own protection. John got his rifle and put the poor feline out of his misery. Who would do something so heinous, so horrible? No human or ever person should have to go through something so horrible. The next event would take place on February 2nd, 1964 at 10 p.m. Police were once again called to the Dilson farm after gunshots were heard. When they arrived to the scene, John Dillinger was out in his backyard. He was an incoherent mess. He was screaming about the farm as well. He claimed to witness each and every other Dillison had got dragged to the well. He spoke that black, oily tendrils rise from the well and pulled Mabel down. She had gone that night to check on the chicken coops, but then she heard a ruckus. John was watching from the window. He jumped in and tried to alert the kids, but they were already gone, and they weren't in the bed when he last saw them. Once again, gunshots ran out after John claimed they came back, but it wasn't them. He spoke that something took his family and then pretended to be them. The police assumed that John had too suffered a mental breakdown and executed the other Dillison members and disposed of their bodies in the farm as well. John was later sentenced to a mental facility for the rest of his days. But the legends and the myths of the rest of the Dillison family were never recovered, but attempts have been made to recover them from the well. Although they tried, the authorities noticed that the well never seemed to end. They declared it was bottomless. No one knew how deep it was, but it was ultimately a situation for the Dillison farm. They recalled Henry's dying ramblings. Did his talk of sun on the ground actually have been true? For almost 2 decades, the Dillison farm would be a desolate mess of land, and people around the area began to suspect that the farm was cursed. The next event wouldn't take place until way later on, 1983. At that point, the Dillison farm was practically in a state of abandoned disrepair. That was until the property would be purchased by Ed Smith Mining, a mining company that was based mainly in New York at that time. In the late fall of that year, Ed Smith sent 20 men to the Dillison farm in hopes of harvesting that rich soil. While the farm had had its cursed reputation, and the legends, the place would produce some of the best crops they had ever seen. At that point, most of the neighbors had moved away, and Dillison was officially a desolate strip of land. 15 of the men vanished one November night during a 30-minute night break. The manager came back to find 15 of his staff gone and 4 incapacitated on the ground. The 4 that remained, none of them could actually recall what happened. All that could be gathered was he heard strange noises coming from one of the freshly dug holes. One of them went to investigate, but he was gone for far too long. Eventually the worker came back, but he seemed like usual strange. The worker seemed almost anxious, trying to convince others to fall into the hole. That's when the 4 remaining workers blacked out, only to wake and see 15 of the comrades missing. The missing 15 workers were never found, recovered, or heard from again. Estimates filed for bankruptcy in 1990 after the families of the missing workers filed a lawsuit against the company. To this day, the Dilson farm still remains, untouched and unexplored. Until a few months ago. I used to work for a team of paranormal investigators, and for safety purposes, my names and colleagues' names will have been changed. Months prior, we were prepping for a 3-day camp and exploration of the Dilson farm. If there was something truly curious about the farm, we were going to find out, and the day would finally come for us to find this out. The team on the exploration consisted of Dave, Ashley, Hector, Rob, and myself. Dave was the leader as he had the most experience exploring paranormal locations. Ashley was roughly new, but she had ambition that he just couldn't seem to find anywhere else. Hector was oldest. Joined the team in hopes of something breaking his skepticism of paranormal, and Rob was a stern, hardboiled guy. But he was cool as long as you stay on his good side. We arrived in that farm around dusk. The place was an old and dusty mess. I never thought I would describe the place as depressed. This place was completely devoid of any life. The first thing Dave pointed out was uncanny was a lack of no sound. It was almost like it was just nothing. There was no birds, no insects, or any passing cars. There was just nothing. Not a single thing could be heard. No cars, nothing. As if it was just completely dead. And not a single creature had ever set foot in this land in years. The farm was just abandoned purgatory lost to time. Ashley comes out. There's something that feels off about this place. This place sure as hell gives me the creeps, that's for sure, said Hector. I was someone who was just memorized by the place. I'd heard about the place, but I'd never set foot on the grounds before. Seeing it in person was far, far more intense than any tales could give off. Daylight is fading, people. Let's move, ordered Dave. He had simply put on what our mission was. We came to investigate the infamous well. The same well that was spoken of the John Dillisa case. Dave's plan was to attach a submergible camera to a thick wire and send it to the well. Our plan was to see if we could actually find what the police never could or anyone else. But John Dilsa's story had some kind of weight that the bodies of the Dilsa family may still be in the well. While Dave, Hector, and Rob set up a line camera for the well, Ashley and I investigated the farm and Dilsa living quarters. The house had nothing really interesting. The house for the most part had been completely emptied. The only thing that remained were a few old kitchen appliances, and the barn was no different. It was pretty much empty. All that was left behind was the farm equipment. The one thing that Ashley noticed well was a strange trail of dirt that led from the barn to fill in the hole by the outhouse. The trail looked way too fresh. What made it creepier is that the trail didn't seem like it was made by a person. It was weird and disorganized. At some points the trail was serpentine, and other times it turned insect-like. Ashley took photos for notes, and I couldn't escape the unease of what would cause that trail, though. It was now 8 p.m. The weather was setting up to be much darker, and we figured that it was going to rain soon. But we decided that we'd set up tents and place floodlights along the scene to get ready. This was going to be a long night, at least that's what Hector said. Hector lowered the camera at the brim of the well, and on Dave's cue, the camera began to descend. We had a vision Ashley confirmed as the camera's point of view appeared on our laptop. It's way too dark. Activate night vision, please. Ashley had activated the night vision from her laptop as the camera began to descend. There was nothing strange so far, but I could see with the walls of the well. We were now descending 20 feet, said Ashley. The man-made stalls of the well continued onward. It seems really weird that this well would be that deep. Stone walls it is, I said. Dave looked at me as if I sounded like an idiot. Probably in his mind. We're now 40 feet down. As she was looking up from the laptop. From this point, we were beginning to see moisture against the walls. Something was a little off, though. There was strange black ooze that began to appear in patches. At one glance, one would assume it would be mildew sludge. But slightly we got his camera and passed it. I almost compared it to slugs. What was that? I asked. Probably just worms. They're decomposers, you know. Maybe they've been eating something dead, don't they? Rob said semi-sarcastically. Ashley looked up confused. We're now at 80 feet. 60? What? 80? What happened to 60? I asked. I don't know. The camera skipped a marker. It's just a glitch. Proceed. Hector and Rob continued to lower the line, but at that time the wall had stopped being stone. The wall was just a combination of dark mud and a weird black sludge. That's when the camera came to a sudden halt. Why did you stop? Asked Dave. We didn't. We think we had something, said Rob. The camera wouldn't show anything up, though. We were still looking at the same murky sludge. That's when the camera began to short out. The signal began to go in and out, and for a split second, the screen changed to something else. Ashley, pause that live feed and play that back. Ashley did so. Sure enough, something showed up for a millisecond. Ashley took a few times before she was successfully able to pause the image. The black screen with a few simple words. What are you looking for? Seeing this made everyone pause. Well, that was creepy, said Hector. What do we do about that? Said Rob. That's just interference, you know. Satellite interruptions. Keep going. This has nothing to do with us, Dave reassured. Although I could see Oliver's face that Dave was thoroughly creeped out. After a bit of wrestling with the wire, the camera got its head again. We're descending 280 feet, Ashley said with her sinking voice. The first time in the entire descent, the camera's audio detected something. It started as a slight noise, but the louder we went, the louder it became. We could wildly hear what it was, and it was a painful sound of me